Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in the Middle Ages? Forget the fairy tales of brave knights and beautiful princesses for a moment. The reality for most people was something far, far different. Life was often short and incredibly hard. Imagine a world with no modern medicine, no sanitation systems, and very little understanding of what caused diseases. Sickness was a constant companion, and death was a familiar neighbor. A simple cut could become a fatal infection. A bad harvest could mean starvation for an entire village. It was a life lived on the edge, a fragile existence where every sunrise felt like a victory. In this world of uncertainty, where did people turn for answers? For hope? They turned to faith. Religion wasn't just something for Sunday mornings. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life. When science couldn't explain why the plague was spreading or why a child fell ill, the church provided an answer. It gave life a sense of order and meaning in the midst of chaos. It offered the promise of a better life after death, a paradise that was a stark contrast to the difficult world people knew. This powerful belief shaped everything. Because life felt so fragile and the afterlife seemed so real, people believed that every single action, no matter how small, had an impact on their immortal soul. This wasn't just about big things like committing crimes. It was about everything. Did you have a greedy thought? Did you tell a small lie? Did you feel envious of your neighbor's good fortune? These weren't just personal feelings. They were potential sins that could weigh down your soul and determine your fate for eternity. The stakes were incredibly high. This meant there was no real concept of a private life as we know it today. People believed that God was always watching, seeing into their very hearts and minds. But it wasn't just God. The church, through its priests and teachings, kept a close eye on its flock. Confession wasn't just a ritual. It was a way for the community's moral and spiritual health to be monitored. Your neighbors were watching too. In the small, tight-knit communities of the Middle Ages, everyone knew everyone else's business. Your reputation, your piety, your every move was subject to public scrutiny. Think about it. Every choice, from who you married to how you conducted your business, to the words you spoke in your own home, was judged not just by your community, but by God himself. This created immense social pressure to conform to religious and social norms. Stepping out of line didn't just risk making you an outcast on earth. It risked eternal damnation. This constant sense of being watched, both by heaven and by your fellow man, created a society fundamentally different from our own. A world where the private soul was a public matter. It's a fascinating glimpse into a mindset so removed from our modern world, where the fear of God and the hope of heaven shaped every aspect of human existence. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this look into the medieval world interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time. Castles, knights in shining armor, epic battles for the throne. When we think of the Middle Ages, this is usually what comes to mind. But what about the people who lived inside those castles and fought in those battles? What did they think about love, about desire, about their own body? The answer is a lot more complex, and frankly, a lot stranger than you might imagine. Forget everything you've seen in movies. The medieval world had a relationship with intimacy that was filled with fear, confusion, and a deep sense of control. This wasn't an era of romantic freedom. It was an era where desire itself was seen as a dangerous force, something to be tamed and suppressed. Pleasure wasn't celebrated. It was viewed with suspicion, often linked to sin and moral corruption. The human body, far from being a source of joy, was often portrayed as a battlefield for the soul, a vessel prone to temptation and weakness. To truly understand what it was like to live 1,000 years ago, we have to explore this forgotten side of history, how an entire society was taught to be wary of its own nature and how the church attempted to regulate every aspect of human intimacy. The church's influence was everywhere, shaping laws, culture, and personal beliefs. Theologians and priests taught that the only acceptable reason for intimacy was procreation, to have children within the confines of marriage. Any hint of pleasure was seen as a slippery slope toward damnation. Think about that for a second. The very act of feeling good was considered sinful. This created a huge amount of anxiety and guilt. People were given long lists of forbidden acts, positions, and even specific days of the week when any form of physical closeness was prohibited. Lent, Advent, Saints' Days, Sundays. The calendar of forbidden times was extensive. leaving very few opportunities for married couples. This fear wasn't just abstract, it had real-world consequences. Medical understanding was, by our standards, incredibly primitive. Ideas about the body were a bizarre mix of ancient Greek theories and religious dogma. For example, many believed the body was governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Any imbalance could lead to sickness, and it was thought that excessive passion could throw these humors completely out of whack. Women's bodies, in particular, were seen as mysterious and inherently more susceptible to corruption and temptation. Medical texts from the time are full of strange remedies and warnings, often linking female anatomy directly to sinfulness and hysteria. So, where did this intense fear come from? A lot of it can be traced back to the idea of original sin. The story of Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden was interpreted as a fall from grace, a fall that tainted all of humanity with carnal desire. Sex became intertwined with this original transgression. It was seen as a necessary evil for continuing the human race, but an evil nonetheless. This core belief colored everything, making desire something to be conquered, not embraced. The ideal was celibacy, to live a life completely free from physical urges, like the saints and clergy. For the average person, this created an impossible standard, a constant struggle between their natural instincts and the rigid doctrines they were taught from birth. Despite all these restrictions, human nature didn't just disappear. People still fell in love, felt desire, and sought connection. But they had to navigate a world that was deeply hostile to these feelings. We see glimpses of this in courtly love poetry, where knights would pine for unattainable noblewomen. This was a safe way to express romantic longing, because it was all about emotional devotion from a distance, without the dangers of physical consummation. But beneath the surface of these official rules and cultural norms, real life was messy and complicated. People broke the rules. They had secret affairs, sought out folk remedies for fertility and contraception, and tried to find moments of intimacy in a world that did everything it could to police it. Understanding this aspect of the medieval world shows us just how much our attitudes have changed. It reveals a time when fear, not freedom, dictated the most personal aspects of life. It is a powerful reminder that the way we view our bodies and our relationships is shaped by the culture we live in. The story of the Middle Ages isn't just about kings and queens. It's also about the inner lives of ordinary people who had to navigate a world that taught them to be afraid of themselves. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to live in the Middle Ages? It wasn't just about castles and knights. For the average person, life was deeply shaped by one powerful institution. The church. Its influence went far beyond Sunday sermons. It reached into the most private corners of people's lives, shaping everything from what they ate to how they thought about their own body. Imagine a world where your every action was judged not just by your neighbors, but by God himself, and the church was his spokesperson on earth. Priests taught a very specific worldview. They believed the physical body was a source of weakness, a vessel of sin constantly at war with the purity of the soul. Natural human desires, what we might see as normal today, were viewed with deep suspicion. They weren't just feelings. They were temptations, tests sent by the devil to challenge your faith and lead you astray from the path of righteousness. This belief system wasn't just an abstract idea. It had very real, everyday consequences. The church laid down the law on almost everything. Think about your daily meals. The church dictated when you had to fast, what foods were forbidden, and when feasting was allowed. This wasn't about health or diet. It was about spiritual discipline and obedience. The same went for your clothes. Modesty was paramount. The way you dressed was a public statement about your piety and your moral character. Flashy or revealing clothing was seen as a sign of vanity and sinfulness. Even the words you spoke were policed. Blasphemy, gossip, or telling untruths were not just bad habits. They were sins that could have serious spiritual consequences. The church encouraged a life of quiet contemplation and prayer, where speech was used carefully and for the glory of God. In this world, there was no real separation between your public life and your private thoughts. Confession was a crucial sacrament, where you were expected to reveal your innermost failings to a priest to receive absolution. Your thoughts were not truly your own. They belonged to a moral universe governed by the church. And what about the most intimate aspects of life, like love and relationships? These were far from private matters. The church defined the very purpose of marriage, which was primarily for procreation, not for personal happiness or romantic love. Intimacy was heavily regulated, permitted only within marriage, and for its specific, sacred purpose. Any deviation from this was considered a grave sin. The concept of privacy, as we know it, simply didn't exist. Your personal life was a moral battleground, and the church provided the rules of engagement. This wasn't just about fear of damnation in the afterlife, though that was a powerful motivator. The church's authority was also very present in this life. Social standing, community acceptance, and even legal matters were often tied to one's good standing with the church. To be excommunicated was to be cast out from society itself, a fate worse than almost any other punishment. So, when we look back at the Middle Ages, it's essential to understand this all-encompassing spiritual framework. The people of this era lived in a world where belief and behavior were fused together. Life was a pilgrimage, and the church held the map, guiding every step of the journey, from the cradle to the grave, and shaping the very soul of medieval society. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time. Have you ever thought about why so many people feel guilty about pleasure? It might sound strange today, but for a huge chunk of history, feeling good was actually considered dangerous. This wasn't just a minor concern. It was a deeply rooted belief that shaped societies, laws, and even our most private moments. Many influential thinkers and religious leaders taught that pleasure was a slippery slope, a temptation that could lead you away from a righteous path and straight into sin. The idea was that our physical desires were base and animalistic, and to be truly virtuous, you had to rise above them, control them, and even suppress them entirely. Imagine being told that the very act of enjoying your favorite food, listening to beautiful music, or laughing with friends was a sign of moral weakness. This mindset created a culture of austerity and self-denial. It wasn't about balance. It was about battling your own nature. The body was often seen as a vessel of sin, a constant source of temptation that needed to be disciplined. This led to practices like fasting, long periods of silence, and avoiding any form of entertainment, all in the name of spiritual purity. The ultimate goal was to detach from worldly pleasures, to get closer to the divine. Nowhere was this fear of pleasure more intense than in the bedroom. Intimacy, even within the sacred bond of marriage, was viewed with extreme suspicion. Theologians and moralists wrote extensively, warning couples about the perils of enjoying themselves too much. The prevailing belief was that physical intimacy was permissible for one reason and one reason only: procreation. It was a duty, a necessary act to continue the family line and populate the earth. But to engage in it for mere pleasure, that was seen as lustful, sinful, and a betrayal of the act's sacred purpose. Think about the pressure that put on married couples. They were expected to perform a biological function while actively trying to suppress any feelings of joy or connection that might arise from it. Some teachings went so far as to suggest that a child conceived in a moment of passion would be tainted by that sin. Couples were advised to remain emotionally detached, to treat intimacy as a chore rather than an expression of love and affection. It's a stark contrast to our modern understanding of a healthy relationship, where emotional and physical intimacy are seen as crucial for bonding and happiness. This historical viewpoint wasn't just a quirky, old-fashioned idea. It had profound and lasting consequences. It created a legacy of shame and guilt around sexuality that we are still unpacking today. When you're taught from a young age that your natural desires are wrong, it can lead to a lifetime of internal conflict, anxiety, and difficulty forming healthy relationships. It also disproportionately affected women, who were often seen as the primary source of temptation, bearing the burden of men's perceived lack of self. Thankfully, our perspective has evolved. Over time, thinkers, scientists, and eventually society at large began to recognize that pleasure is not the enemy. It's a natural and essential part of the human experience. Modern psychology tells us that seeking pleasure and avoiding pain are fundamental drivers of our behavior. Encoding life-forming deep connections and experiencing joy are vital for our mental and emotional well-being. We now understand that a healthy, fulfilling life includes embracing pleasure in all its forms. From the simple joy of a sunny day to the profound connection of a loving relationship. It is a powerful reminder of how far we've come and the importance of questioning the beliefs we inherit. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the ideas that have shaped our world. See you next time, your soulmate. It was a serious, strategic business deal. You probably wouldn't even meet your husband until your wedding day. Your father, or maybe your brother, would have arranged the whole thing. Why? For an alliance, to gain land, secure a title, or simply to ensure the family's survival and social standing. Love wasn't on the checklist. In fact, the whole idea of romantic love as the basis for marriage is a much, much more recent invention. For the nobility and royalty, the stakes were even higher. A royal marriage could seal a peace treaty between warring kingdoms or create a powerful new dynasty. Think of Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of her time. These weren't love matches. They were political power plays on an international scale. And for protection, to work the land, and to provide for the family. It was a partnership, a working team. It was a practical necessity. When a farmer's wife died, he would often remarry very quickly, not out of a lack of feeling for his first wife, but because he desperately needed a partner to help manage the workload and care for his children. It was a harsh reality of life. So, if love wasn't the point, what was? The church played a huge role. This meant it was permanent and unbreakable. Divorce as we know it didn't exist. Annulments were possible, but they were rare, expensive, and usually only an option for the very. A woman couldn't legally be forced into a marriage against her will, although family and social pressure would have been immense. Inside the marriage, roles were strictly defined. The husband was the head of the household. He was expected to be the provider and protector. The wife's domain was the home. She was expected to be obedient, manage the domestic sphere, and produce heirs. Marriage wasn't the end of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a lifelong contract, a strategic alliance, and a partnership for survival. It's a fascinating glimpse into a world so different from our own. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like to explore. See you next time. Have you ever thought about how different life was in the Middle Ages? I mean, really different? We often think about the big stuff, like plagues, wars, and castles. But what about the really personal, intimate parts of life? For married couples back then, even their private lives were heavily regulated, and not by the government, but by the church. It's a fascinating and honestly pretty wild chapter of history. Imagine being married, in love, and living in a tiny, probably cold, medieval hut. You'd think your personal time with your spouse would be, well, personal, but not so fast. The church had a say in it, and it had a very long list of forbidden days. We're not just talking about 1 or 2 days here and there. We're talking about a significant chunk of the entire year being declared off limits for marital intimacy. So, what were these forbidden times? Let's start with the big ones. Major religious seasons. The entire period of Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter, was a time of fasting and penance, and that meant complete abstinence. No exceptions. Then there was Advent, the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. Same rule, total abstinence. Add those two together, and you've already lost a huge portion of the year. But it didn't stop there. The church's calendar was packed with holy days and feast days celebrating various saints. And guess what? Most of those were also forbidden days. Think of it like modern public holidays, but instead of a day off for fun, it was a day off from being intimate with your own husband or wife. It was seen as a way to honor the saint or the holy occasion. On top of the major seasons and feast days, certain days of the week were consistently banned. Sundays, being the Lord's Day, were often considered too holy for physical relations. Many theologians also argued against Fridays, in remembrance of the crucifixion, and Saturdays, in honor of the Virgin Mary. Some even added Thursdays to the list. If you were a devout couple trying to follow all the rules, you might find yourself with only 1 or 2 approved nights a week, if you were lucky. The restrictions could get even more specific. There were also rules about abstaining for a few days before receiving communion, and for a period after a woman gave birth. When you start adding it all up, Lent, Advent, countless feast days, every Sunday, Friday, Saturday, and other special occasions, you can see how the allowed days dwindled rapidly. For some couples, depending on how their local priests interpreted the rules, there might have been fewer than 100 days in the entire year when they were permitted to be together. Now, you might be wondering, why? What was the reasoning behind all of this? The core idea stemmed from a belief that spirituality and physical pleasure were fundamentally at odds. While marriage and procreation were seen as necessary, the act itself was often viewed with suspicion, as something that could distract from one's devotion to God. The goal was to subordinate physical desires to spiritual discipline. By limiting when couples could be intimate, the Church aimed to encourage a more spiritual, less worldly focus in their lives. And the consequences for breaking these rules, they were taken very seriously. It wasn't just a social faux pas. It was considered a sin. Confessors would ask married people about their adherence to the forbidden days. The punishments could range from assigned prayers and fasting to more severe penances. The ultimate fear, of course, was the threat of eternal punishment in the afterlife. The Church taught that children conceived on a forbidden day might be born with disabilities or be prone to sin themselves. This was a powerful motivator for people to follow the rules, even in the privacy of their own homes. It's a side of history we don't often hear about, but it paints a vivid picture of how deeply religious authority permeated every aspect of medieval life, right down to the most intimate moments between a husband and wife. It really makes you appreciate the personal freedoms we have today, doesn't it? Thanks for watching and thinking about the past with me. If you found this interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the hidden corners of history. See you next time.